Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our October webinar with the Affiliate Network Professional Council. I'm going to share my screen so that I can start to talk about the agenda for today. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to a webinar titled Developing Affiliate Handbooks for Everything Tesol in your region and making it an open educational resources. And it's my pleasure to have 4 speakers with us today, Chadia, Drew, Louis, and Sherry. Let me just introduce myself a little bit and also my co-host today, Betsy. My name is Linh Phung. I'm the incoming chair of the Affiliate Network Professional Council. Let me just talk about our work a little bit. The Affiliate Network Professional Council supports Tesol International Association by helping to ensure a strong and robust affiliate network. And we have activities throughout the year through these committees. We have the year-round events committee, which this event is supporting. We have the convention committee because we have a lot of activities during the Tesol convention. We have a newsletter committee. So if you have something to share about your affiliate or about leadership, please feel free to reach out to us. And we also have the affiliate peer advisory program to support affiliates get connected with one another and collaborate with each other. So I will let Betsy introduce herself a little bit, and I will talk a little bit more about the work of the affiliate. Betsy?
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Betsy Karas-Lazarus, and I am the chair of the ANPC. And I've been part of the ANPC for a few years now, and I'm very excited to have you here and very excited to be working with affiliates from different parts of the world. Even though this is the Maryland Handbook and other topics, we're working with Canada. One of our speakers is from Warsaw. So even in our panel, we're represented globally. So thank you for coming. And I'm looking forward to the presentation.
Thank you, Betsy. So I just want to mention that there are a lot of benefits for Tesol organizations all over the world to become affiliates of Tesol International. You can see that as leaders or affiliate members, you can network and collaborate with other affiliates. You can share knowledge, and you can also access opportunities for grants and other resources to support affiliate association activities. And also, as members of affiliates, it may be also a good opportunity to join Tesol International as members as well. And if you're interested, you can join by logging into tesol.org/join. So without further ado, we would like to introduce our 3 first speakers to talk about the Maryland Tesol Handbook. First, I'd like to introduce Drew Pagan. Drew Pagan, EDD, is Associate Clinical Professor of Applied Linguistics and Language Education, Coordinator of the Tesol Program, and Associate Director of the Multilingual Research Center at the University of Maryland, College Park. He is also the 2022-2023 President of Maryland Tesol. His research focuses on preparing non-ESOL educators to work with English learners at all levels in all contexts of U.S. K-12 education. To learn more about Drew, you can talk to him today or visit his website. Betsy, could you introduce Sherry?
Yes, I'd like to introduce Sherry Lyons. She has worked in the Tesol field for more than 10 years in adult ESL and higher education programs that serve adult learners. She served 6 years as a member of the Maryland Tesol Executive Board and is the past president of the organization. She is currently a teacher educated in the MA Tesol program at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where she has taught for the past 7 years. So welcome, Sherry.
Thank you, Bessie. Next, I would like to introduce Luis Javier Penton Herrera, PhD, who is an assistant professor at the University of Warsaw and as coordinator of the graduate Tesol certificate at the George Washington University. He served as the 30th president of Maryland Tesol from 2018 to 2019, and currently serves as the social responsibility interest section past co-chair 2022 to 2023 at Tesol International Association. To learn more about Louis, you can talk to him as well as visiting his website. And I just have to add that I had the pleasure of working with Louis during my first year at the ANPC. So welcome back and thank you, Louis. Over to you, Drew, to start your presentation on Maryland Tesol Handbook.
Okay, thank you so much, Lynn, for the fantastic introduction. Everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world, and greetings from College Park, Maryland, about 5 miles away from Washington, D.C. It's a pleasure to see all of you today. My name is Drew Pagan. I'm joined with my colleagues today, Luis Javier Pendon Herrera and Sherry Lyons, to talk about developing an affiliate handbook for everything Tesol in your region and making it an open educational resource. Specifically, what we want to talk about today, the three of us representing the Maryland Tesol Association, is a book that we co-created and was published last year called the Maryland Tesol Handbook for Educators of English Learners. As we are all aware, the field of Tesol is vast and global and quite diverse, including with the types of materials and information that's within the field. And for the past 20 years that I've been in the field, I've met with numerous people in local regions who continually asked, what is applicable to me here in this global field of Tesol? There's so much information in the field of Tesol. What's applicable to me? So the purpose of the handbook overall was to provide various stakeholders who work with English learners all the information that is pertinent from the Tesol field, but is applicable to them in our particular region. In other words, think of it as everything about Tesol in one location as applicable to the state of Maryland. We're very careful in our wording of the title. As you can see here, this is meant for educators of English learners, not just teachers. And this was very important because the purpose of this handbook is for various stakeholders. It's for people who are current teachers, people who are becoming teachers in training, people who are in the ESOL field, people who are outside of the ESOL field but work with English learners in other capacities. This is also meant for people who are administrators at various levels of K-12, as well as adult and higher education. It's also meant for people who are in not-for-profit organizations, as well as governmental organizations, as well as independent researchers who want to know more about our multilingual learners, their educational settings, and who works with them within the state of Maryland. So it's very important to realize that the word educator is done purposefully in that it is general enough to think about who are all the stakeholders that work with English learners, including teachers, but also going beyond teachers themselves. One thing that's very important to note before we go into the specifics of the Maryland Tesol Handbook is that this is available as an open educational resource. And because it's an open educational resource, we were very particular in making sure that everyone had access to this book. Everyone had access to this information, regardless of where they were, just because we have found that for many people, particularly within our area of Maryland, it's very difficult to find this information. They're not sure which governmental agency to go to, or which state department to go to, or which educational department to go to. We wanted to make sure that it was available for everyone who wanted to really understand what is it about the Tesol field within the state of Maryland. So a very quick overview as to what the handbook actually entails. There is a brief introduction that provides background as to how the handbook came about, and both Luis and Sherry are going to go into more detail about the development of the handbook. Part one really focuses on who are English learners in general. It focuses on key acronyms that are used in the Tesol field, but applicable to Maryland. It focuses on components of the second language acquisition field and process that are applicable to what is done here and utilized within our K-12 system, as well as in our adult and higher education systems. It focuses on key assessments that are utilized with our English learners here within the state. Basically, a general overview is who are English learners and what is generally done with them. Part 2 goes into the Maryland English learner demographics. Who are our English learners in the state specifically? Who are they in K-12? Who are they in adult and higher education? And what are the types of programs that are offered to these students across the spectrum? Again, K through 12, primary and secondary school, as well as in adult and higher education. Part 3 goes into the logistics of how do I actually become an Esol teacher in Maryland? Esol being the acronym that is used in our US K-12 system, particularly in this state, or an ESL teacher, which is still the common acronym that's used to become a teacher in adult and higher education within the state. What are the routes that we need to use? What are the different components that we need to have in order to become teachers of these various areas working with our English learners in the state? Part 4 is very unique. Part 4 focuses on how do we advocate for our learners? We are in 2022. It is something that's very important for us to realize. How am I, as an educator, the best advocate for my students, for their families, for communities around the state? How can I do that? And we'll talk a little bit more about what goes into this information. And we also have vignettes from actual Maryland Tesol members who focus on how this is done in the primary, secondary, and adult education settings. One thing which the three of us authors have found over the years is that very often educators want to know, where can I direct my English learners for additional resources, for health resources, for legal resources? Where can I address them to learn more about information if they are an older English learner and they are LGBTQIA? Where can they go for that information? So we have an entire section here that focuses on various community organizations that specifically help English learners in various capacities in and around the area of Maryland. Finally, part 6, how can people who are educators within the state of Maryland continue their professional development well after their initial training, well after their initial education? What is currently offered here in the state of Maryland for that? So this is the overview of what is the Maryland Tesol Handbook. I'm going to hand it over to Luis now, who's going to talk about the initial developments of it.
Thank you very much, Drew, for getting us started on the presentation. And thank you everyone for joining us. And as I'm presenting now, I'm realizing that I think my voice is kind of, I don't know, it's cold weather outside. So I apologize for my voice. If it seems like I'm losing some voice, I just realized that. So a little bit of information here about our project and how everything started. So a few years back, I started my career in Virginia, in the state of Virginia, in the United States, and then I moved to Maryland. And as soon as I moved to Maryland, the different states, as Drew was sharing with us, they have different, the Tesol field is very, very big, it's global. And in every region that we move to, they have their own practices, they have their own realities. When we think about, for example, English learners, when we talk about certification for teachers, when we talk about resources, all of these things, it changes. Even in the United States, one country, if you go state by state, they have their own practices. So as a new teacher, I joined Maryland Tesol as soon as I arrived in the state of Maryland. And then as soon as one of the meetings, we were having a conversation, and then I asked someone, hey, do we have a resource or somewhere where I can learn more about Maryland and Esol in Maryland? And we realized that we didn't have that. And I just, as a new teacher, I was a new teacher, recently moved to Maryland. That was a conversation that we started having with, at the time, the president, who was Karen, fantastic president, like, well, I'm biased, but all the presidents of Maryland Tesol, fantastic presidents. And, we had that conversation, and we started identifying, okay, this is something that needs to be done, perhaps a project that could be approached in the future. But of course, as we're always members of our organization, and we're serving in different capacities, things get very busy. And then that idea just kind of stayed there. It did stay in our radar, but then I took more responsibilities, eventually becoming the 38th president. But then when I transitioned into past president, I had a little bit more time at that point to circle back to the idea of a handbook, a resource. I don't think we had the word handbook at that time in mind, but we did have an idea of putting together resources and information that any new teacher, like I was before I moved to Maryland, could just grab that information and then help English learners and support them, and also to learn about Tesol in Maryland. And then from that, when I became the past president, we started kind of going back to this idea, circling back to it. And then that's when we started, actually, after I completed my year of past president, when I completed my service moving out of Maryland Tesol, that's when we actually started going stronger about, okay, what can we do here now, and how do we proceed next? And we started having some conversations, and we started some brainstorming with the Maryland Tesol board, which was very, very supportive at that time. There were, and that's what we need for organizations to be very supportive of ideas and innovations that are going to move the organization forward, that are going to help the members they serve. So they were always very open, very involved in the process. And then we started brainstorming, just initial brainstormings. One of the questions that came to mind, for example, was who's going to be involved? And in this process, like I said, Maryland Tesol was always very, very present and very open to all of these brainstorming ideas and the process. And some of the questions that we asked ourselves, for example, when we said who's going to be involved, we thought, okay, in addition to identifying who's going to be involved, we have to make sure that we choose someone who is responsible and committed. To give you an idea, we started with a large pool of potential contributors for the handbook, but then for different reasons, people started dropping out, or they had a lot of responsibilities and they just couldn't be part of the project right at that point. But then we learned that fewer is better. It's always good to have a few committed, responsible team members in the group. And for us, of course, we had Sherry and we had Drew, and that was a fantastic team. And then it is important for the team's Tesol experiences to complement each other. And I think that was very, very important for us. And we were always trying to think about, okay, who can we bring in from, I don't know, higher education, adult education, K through 12. We wanted all the voices represented, because we are professionals, but we are very specialized usually in our areas, right? So that was fantastic. For example, that Sherry, she's an expert in adult education. Drew, higher education. I brought my K through 12 background when I was teaching at that time in high school, and I've been teaching K through 12. So recruit individuals who have or are given enough time commitment. This, I do want to stress this. I cannot stress it enough. It's very important to have members who have enough time. And this is why I circle back to this idea after I transitioned out of Maryland Tesol after my year of past president, because then I had a little bit more time to commit to this project. Even during my years past president, which I think one of the past presidents quoted it to be one of the best positions in Maryland Tesol. I'm kind of quoting it loosely here. I still didn't have enough time, because you always have a lot of commitments and things that you're working on as part of the board, right? So it's very important to think about this. Another question: what is this handbook going to be about? And we also had a conversation about the resource. What do we want? A pamphlet, a book, a handbook? So it's always very, very important to plan in advance. For example, when you're thinking about before writing, when you're thinking about the writing process, who's going to be your audience? How many sections? How are you going to divide this? I do remember, for example, from the first time that we talked, Sherry, Drew, and I, we wanted to make sure that this was a very easy to use resource, a handbook that was less than 100 pages. Consciously, we wanted that number to be the max amount of pages that we had, 100, because realistically, we're doing this for educators, people who are very busy professionals. So we just wanted to create a resource where they could go straight to the information that they wanted to learn about, and then get that information and keep, moving forward. So all of these things we have to consider. Also, why are you, as an affiliate of Tesol, pursuing this project? This is something that has to be explored before you begin the writing process. So, for example, think about the fact that as Tesol affiliates, we are, and we should be, the primary resource in our local contexts. That's exactly what we wanted to be in Maryland Tesol. We wanted to be the primary resource in all Tesol English learner related Maryland issues. So how to support English learners, organizations, everything. We wanted to be that resource that teachers and educators could go to. And then last but not least, we have how is this handbook going to come to fruition? And this is very important when we think about organization. Again, all of these questions, these are initial brainstorming questions that we had before we started writing. So very similar to the writing process. Don't start writing, just brainstorm first. It's very helpful. What's the plan for drafting, including a solid timeline? For example, Drew, Sherry, and I, we started assigning specific sections, specific parts to each other. We started building on our strengths and complementing each other. For example, Sherry focused a little bit on the adult education, whereas Drew on higher education, me from my perspective, okay, through 12. And that's what we put together, the three of us, always complementing the three of us. And that's how we approach the drafting process, but also timeline. We started giving ourselves very strict timelines, keeping in mind that we wanted to have the project completed by we wanted to have it done within a year, if I remember correctly, around that timeline. So always, thinking in advance, okay, how much time am I going to devote to one chapter, one part, however you want to call it. It was very, very helpful. It also kept us moving forward, which is very needed. And then here, I'm going to now turn it over to the wonderful Sherry to go through the process of creation.
Thank you very much, Luis. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us. And as Luis pointed out with his voice, mine, I think I'm suffering from a little bit of fall allergies. So got a little bit of a scratchy throat, but I hope that you can hear me clearly and that my throat will hold out here, my voice will hold out here. But once we had an overall framework for the handbook, as Luis mentioned, it was time to get into the heart of the actual creation process. So we really set out to create the type of resource that we wished we had had when we started in the field. And we knew very early on that we wanted this to be a living document, one that could easily and quickly be changed to reflect the current and evolving landscape of the Tesol field, as opposed to a hardbound book that could potentially be outdated as soon as it's published. It was during this stage of creation and development that the seedling of an idea that Luis spoke of earlier really started to sprout and grow into the introduction and overview section, as well as the 6 main parts that Drew already detailed and that are listed here and contained in the actual handbook. The larger process of creating and developing the final product is really rooted in many of the stages of the writing process. Our writing process spanned the typical pathway from pre-writing to publishing and sharing the final product, and touched on all of the stages and steps in between. Deciding on what should be included in the handbook started with a simple conversation among the 3 of us during the pre-writing phase. With our target audience of Maryland educators and stakeholders in mind, we traded ideas and came to a consensus on the 6 parts. Although we wanted the information contained in each section to be accessible to the broad audience of target readers and users and not be overly academic, we still wanted this resource and reference materials to be rooted in strong research. During the research phase, we certainly consulted the Tesol literature, but we also consulted state, local, and federal resources with a primary focus on using state sources as much as possible, in addition to interviewing and consulting with some of our contacts in the field. Once we had a solid plan in place, we were ready to move forward with the rest of the writing process. Over the span of a year, we proceeded to write our drafts for each of the 6 parts by tackling one part at a time and dividing the work based on our respective backgrounds and expertise in the field. For example, since my background is in adult and higher educational context, as Luis pointed out, it made sense for me to write those sections or to at least contribute to those sections with a co-author. During our monthly meetings, we reviewed, revised, and edited our work, serving as reviewers for each other. Throughout this iterative process, there were some parts that were rather straightforward and didn't take a lot of time to research and to write, like part 1 on English learners, which covers the alphabet soup of common acronyms used in Tesol, as Drew mentioned. Because this information is straightforward in nature and provides definitions and explanations of key terms, we decided to keep this part largely text-based. On the other hand, there were other parts of the handbook, like parts 2 through 5, that took more time to research and write and refine. Many of these parts have a lot of dense information, so during the revising and editing phase, we decided to include visuals to help break up the text and to make these parts more user-friendly by incorporating various charts, graphs, and infographics so that readers could quickly and easily see the pertinent information in a digestible format that also supported the information contained in the text. Some examples of the visuals include various graphs, as you can see here in part 2, on learner demographics and levels of education, again providing a snapshot of information in this part. Additionally, for part 3, we included an infographic outlining the process of becoming an Esau teacher in Maryland. In this particular infographic, this is specific to those who are interested in adult education. And again, this visual encapsulates the important information at a glance, which we felt was, again, important to make things more user-friendly. In part 5, in addition to the written summary of services provided by each organization, we thought it would be helpful to also capture and present this information in an easy-to-read chart so that readers can quickly see the full list of community organizations and which category of services they offer. Based on the check marks, as you can see here, it's easy for readers to see that the organizations specialize and focus on a few services, and others offer the full scope of services across categories provided, like advocacy, health, education, family, etc. If readers needed more information about a particular organization of interest, the names of the organizations are hyperlinked on the chart and connect readers to the organization's respective websites. In part 4, this one is a little special, and Drew pointed a few things out here. So in part 4 on advocating for English learners that Luis wrote for us, we wanted to bring the advocacy framework detailed in this section to life by shining a spotlight on real-world, first-hand accounts of advocacy efforts of educators in primary, secondary, and adult educational contexts. This led to a discussion on recruiting writers and featuring their stories in this part of the handbook to showcase advocacy in action in Maryland. We each put forth names of possible authors and checked their availability and willingness to contribute to the handbook in this way. Our very own Luis's advocacy is featured in this part. We know that there are many more untold stories of advocacy in action throughout Maryland, and the stories presented in the handbook are a small sample of the real work that's being done in support of English learners in the state. These poignant and important stories highlight the range of what advocacy looks like and what it means to advocate for our learners in concrete terms within a given educational context. These stories provide an open window and a glimpse into the hearts and minds of educators who tirelessly work on behalf of English learners in Maryland and help to add a richness and dimension to this part of the handbook. And we are very grateful for all those who contributed to this section. After reviewing, revising, proofing, and editing each part when completed, we got to the stage of being ready to proof the final draft before sending it out to external reviewers. We were very intentional about having reviewers be representative of the wide target audience for the final product, educators and stakeholders, as Drew explained in the beginning. We also made a conscious decision not to have too many reviewers to avoid too many contradictory comments. So similar to what Luis mentioned in terms of kind of narrowing the field in terms of who would work on the project. So we got it down to the three of us, which actually worked rather well. We had that same kind of concept in mind in terms of how many people we would send this out to for comments. We were also sure to get agreement from or agreement to review from each person before sending out the final draft. We recruited members from the Maryland Tesol Executive Board. Many of them represented the target audience of educators, administrators, and other stakeholders. And since the handbook had been sanctioned by the board, we wanted them to have an opportunity to review it before publication. We certainly wanted to give the advocacy spotlight authors an opportunity to review, given their important contributions to the handbook. We were able to recruit an administrator in higher education from the College of Education at the University of Maryland, as well as a representative from the Title III office for an MSDE or Maryland State Department of Education perspective. Again, we wanted it to be a well-rounded group of reviewers that really represented our target audience. Based on the feedback received from the reviewers, we revised and edited a final time. So after our extensive process of planning, writing, researching, internal and external reviewing, revising, and editing over the course of a year, that original seedling of an idea grew into the final product that we proudly published and shared with educators and stakeholders in Maryland, and that we happily share with you all today. And now that the handbook has been out in the world, or at least out in the state of Maryland for some time, Drew will share information on outcomes of getting the final product into the hands of our target audience.
So as you can see from everything that Luis and Sherry just shared, this has been a labor of love. This has been a very extensive project that we were very happy to undertake. And we're very happy that this happened because of the outcomes that have occurred since this was published summer of 2021. So a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders, both within and outside of the state of Maryland, have actually utilized this handbook for many different purposes. One thing which I would like to reiterate before I go into who these various stakeholders are that have utilized the handbook is something that Sherry brought up, the fact that this is a living document. When we did our initial brainstorming, as Luis was discussing earlier, one thing that we all agreed on is that this is something that, number one, we did not want as a hardback book because of the drastic changes that occur within our field very often, as well as the political and legislative and educator changes that happen within the field of Esau within the state of Maryland and how often that occurs. So we want something that could be fairly easily revised on a regular basis. And those of you who have published hardback covered books know that it takes quite some time to do that. And those books can get very outdated very quickly. So we want something that was much more malleable to change and revisions as the field and as policies and educational perspectives changed within the field as well. But number two, we also wanted something that, as Sherry pointed out, that would have URLs directly embedded within the PDF, so that people could simply click on things and go to other areas if they needed other data or other organizations. Those have been the main factors that have affected who these stakeholders are that have utilized the handbook. And we have already started to get quite a bit of feedback from these stakeholders, thanking us for this being a living document, something that will be continually revised and adapted, but also that's something that allows them to simply click on things and make connections from the different sections and parts of the book. So who has actually utilized this since summer 2021 when this came out? Well, first of all, teacher education programs at the majority of our institutions for higher education throughout the state. I am talking about our teacher preparation programs in Tesol, but also beyond. So as Lynn introduced with my biography, I work at the University of Maryland in the Tesol program, but right now, all pre-service certification areas are now given this handbook at the beginning of their internship year. Given how extensive the English learner population is within the state, everyone, general elementary, special education, 712 biology, physical education, all librarians are now given this at the University of Maryland College of Education at the beginning of their internships to utilize to give them more context about how to work with English learners. So Tesol and beyond. Number two, more recently, we are now also getting administrators realizing that their preparation does not prepare them for working with multilingual learners and people from various cultural backgrounds and linguistic backgrounds. So at the University of Maryland, we have started a brand new doctoral program for administrators in the school district that has the largest English learner population of the entire state. Part of that doctoral program is during their orientation, everyone is given this handbook. Because of that, there are now other administrator certification programs outside of the University of Maryland throughout the state that are also beginning to give this to their administrators who are going up for their initial certification to become a principal or an assistant principal, as well as those going for their advanced certification, people who want to become superintendents of entire school districts. In addition to pre-service and certification stakeholders, we also have people who are already current teachers and administrators who are using this handbook for part of their own professional development. This is being done in both K-12 as well as in adult and higher education institutions, as well as in local libraries, for example, who provide volunteer services for working with English learners and their families. Local libraries and local organizations are also beginning to utilize this as well. Government institutions. So for example, various areas of government in the state of Maryland that focuses on adult education, the Department of Labor, as well as other departments, are now beginning to utilize this when working with their programmatic directors. Just because, again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, the field of Tesol is so vast and so global and so diverse, which is wonderful, but it can be quite frustrating for someone who's relatively new for the field to think about, well, how does this all connect within the confines of the state of Maryland? Well, here is one resource where all of that information is condensed to show you how to do that. So for government institutions who have little time to be doing extensive research, trying to connect the dots, where do I look? Who do I go talk to? This one document has proven to be very beneficial for them from a time perspective. As well as government officials making legislation. I am very honored to actually be working with a couple of the delegates from the Maryland State House in Annapolis, which is the capital of the state of Maryland, who are now getting ready to put forth legislation to make Maryland schools bilingual. So the promotion of bilingual education. They are utilizing the handbook as one of their resources to really show how the demographics of Maryland have changed, not just in K-12, but also in adult and higher education in our immigrant population. And again, all the information is in one location. Not-for-profit local organizations, as I mentioned, libraries, other institutions, many of the community organizations that we have mentioned in section 5, part 5 of our book, are now utilizing this as well, just to provide the people who work with them information about education. It's also a great way of introducing a lot of recently arrived families who are not familiar with the field of Tesol or with education in Maryland to get a taste of what it means that their children will be experiencing when they go into the school system. Finally, numerous independent researchers have also been utilizing this handbook for their own purposes, various purposes. It's been wonderful seeing this happen. And just to give you a taste of this, I'm not sure how many of you are on ResearchGate.com online. I just got notification a couple of days ago that just on ResearchGate alone, we've already had 1,000 reads for the handbook, just on ResearchGate. That does not include Google Scholar. That does not include any of our K-12 populations who are not focusing on research, just in that one area. So this is definitely reaching many, many stakeholders. To reiterate, this has been a labor of love. We were very pleased and honored to be able to do this for the Maryland Tesol Association. It has been very well received throughout the state and beyond. We feel that this is something that our field within our state desperately needed. Again, to bring everything about the Tesol field into one location as it is applicable to Maryland specifically. Of course, we realize that a lot of things in the handbook, the direct things that you see in the handbook, may not be applicable to your own specific regions or where your own specific affiliates are. But take a step back and think about, how can the field of Tesol directly connect to where I am right now? And what is it that my new teachers, my new teaching assistants, my administrators who might be a bit apprehensive about doing this, what do they really need to know about the Tesol field right now when they go to work tomorrow, so that they can make an immediate difference in ensuring that English learners have equitable access to education? And with that, I would like to say thank you. Here is our contact information. Myself, Luis, and Sherry, as well as Luis and my own websites that you can visit for more information. And I believe we will have time for questions a little bit later.
Thank you so much, Drew. That is really impressive. That is high impact work. And I'm very grateful for you and your team to be here to share with affiliates. There are questions, but we're going to ask them toward the end. And now I would like to introduce Chadia, or Bessie, can you introduce Chadia so that she can start her part of the presentation?
And thank you for that information. It was very useful, and we do have a number of questions, especially how did you do the outreach, but we're going to be, you can be answering that later on. So let me introduce Chadia Mansour. She's a Fulbright alumna, applied linguist, distance and online education expert, an educational leader with extensive teaching experience in higher education, curriculum development, and instructional design in North America and the Middle East. She has held several active leadership roles in various professional associations, such as Tesol International, EFLIS Chair, Nominating Committee, Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and International Association for Blended Learning Executive Board Member. Chadia worked on a number of leadership projects that involve instructional and course design for online and blended learning, as well as knowledge mobilization and creation of open educational resources repository for the ELT community around the world. So welcome, Chadia. And we're looking forward to hearing what information you have to share about.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Bessie. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, everyone who's here. What a great project. Honestly, I've been like smiling the whole time. And I think Drew and the team, all the information that you provided is extremely valuable to everybody. Drew made my part a little bit easier. So I would like you to kind of go and reflect on all the questions that he asked at the end and the overview that he provided at the beginning, because those are my references for the work that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and you let me know if you can see my slides. Can you see my slides? Okay, I am going to start here. I'll move this little piece to the other screen. You know, a lot of work to do here. So yes, so you all talked about the handbook and the process and all the great work and the content that it included. What I'm going to really mention here and touch upon is some of the considerations to make an open educational resource. The handbook has been used by many, has been circulated. You intended to have it accessible for as many as possible, but it is yet to be called officially an open educational resource. And here are some of the considerations for you to follow to make it really an open educational resource. Some of the first part is the content related considerations, and then accessibility considerations, and also copyright and licensing considerations. And just briefly, some takeaways of those 3 points. I saw one of the questions earlier in the chat about the licensing. You will see that in that part of the licensing. That would answer your question, whoever who asked that question. So let's start by the content-related considerations. So as I just mentioned, you have all seen the content of the handbook, and it's an absolute high quality that may benefit so many, and already Drew mentioned so many of them who already started benefiting from, or also that could inspire many, and especially here with this event with the ANPC, other affiliates. That's what we really would like to provide in here, other affiliates to follow these wonderful steps and be inspired to do a similar project as the one that you all came up with, and you did, that fits their needs and context. So what are we doing here is to look at this handbook from the lens of open educational resource. And Drew gave a fabulous overview that would be so useful. And Lynn mentioned in the chat, well, I love the overview and the rationale for the project. And he also wrapped up, Drew, with the outcomes of the handbook. So absolutely, because the general and specific objectives and the contextualization that's of the content and the usefulness and the transferability of these objectives, whether general or specific of these parts, and the outcomes that Drew mentioned at the end are especially important from the perspectives of an open educational resource. So if we could use Drew's maybe recording today and script the way he really passionately and clearly stated and explained and put into a text and a cover sheet up front of the handbook, the very first thing right there. Also with the points of the outcomes and how all those stakeholders and parents and all the people that he mentioned could benefit from it, in what sense, that would be something, the very first step of open educational resource, because the cover sheet for the handbook will clearly and briefly include the overall objective, in what ways it will serve the targeted audience, and it should be really upfront for anyone, because it will help with the quick, at the very glance understanding of the handbook. There are several sections and each has an objective stated, which is great, but we need to kind of move those parts of those objectives in particular upfront again. As for someone who's looking for OER, it is crucial for me, for instance, and for anyone who's looking in a web, at one of the repository or at a web server or anywhere, just to find that piece of information very easily and very quickly. So I'm surfing and I'm trying to make quick decisions based on what I can see while scrolling down and skimming throughout the handbook, and I need to find what I think I might need to further read later. And that's the whole purpose of adding a cover sheet in there. So it'd also be very helpful to have a short section upfront on how this information could be used in different contexts. And for example, if we take an X high school that finds all of or some of this information and very useful and would like to adopt the handbook as a guide for them, the cover sheet will help upfront with the first stage of whether to find the handbook useful or not. I'll continue with this and reading it. Also, I'll just move on, and I'm not going to be reading the whole thing. So why is this again very important for open educational resources? Well, because it is important, because open educational resources have a life cycle, and each cycle is important knowing the objectives upfront will serve and facilitate each phase of the cycle. So it is important for those who want to create a similar handbook from scratch to find your handbook and understand at a quick glance again the purpose, the objectives, and it would serve them and how it would serve them in a more kind of specific example, concrete, like Drew gave many of them actually earlier. So so they can use it as also a sample guide, or they can modify it based on their own objectives. So once they find that information and see if they're going to use it or not, or maybe they used it, that is not enough. That's not where the cycle is going to end. Your objective is not for them to find it and use it. Your objective is to make it as open, as accessible, as reusable as possible to reach as many various stakeholders or others as possible, because finding and using OER, as you can see on those green circles, is not really enough. There are only two parts of the full life cycle. So you have to kind of tackle and consider the full cycle of open educational resource, as you can see in here, because what makes OER so useful is the fact that the content can be edited, it can be revised, it can be reshared, and you want that to be reusable again. So that's the content consideration, really. Just you have all the information, so it's like moving a few parts around and kind of clearly stating your objectives, outcomes, etc., in a more upfront and a more clear way, like for anybody, like right now for us, a synopsis of what really that is about, without really us going to kind of into details. Now we're going to move on to some accessibility considerations, and Jerry talked about this earlier in the the content and the pictures, the images, some of the tables, and all those things in part 2 in particular. When I was looking at the handbook, I stopped at part 2 a lot because it does have a lot of pictures, whether personal pictures of people like students and others. It has a lot of information tables, and I was wondering, is that a public domain information? Where is that information coming from? The graphs and all those are all for, and there is also some colors and clear, and sometimes links that it's not really that clear. So all those details are important for accessibility, from the accessibility perspective. And here I'm going to really share with you today this framework, which is extremely useful, I think, for anybody who's interested in open educational resource and creating open educational resources, which is this, what we call the sculpt for accessibility. It's one of the most valuable aspects for OER is the fact that they are accessible, right? That's the whole point for OER. And sculpt is a very good guide for accessibility consideration, and it stands for structure, color and contrast, use of images, links, plain English, and tables. And these are crucial for accessibility, which is part of the whole concept of openness and equity for educational resources. So we're going to have a quick look at the sculpt. There's here a website that I already opened for you. So here is, so if we go for the guide, there are all, these are the sculpt, the structure, color, contrast. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the first 4 ones. So we're going to walk through them. So if we go to the first one here, I'm not saying that the handbook does not have a structure, absolutely not. But the structure, as in any document or piece of writing, is very important. But for the handbook, for instance, there are headings and subheadings, there are links, and there are all of these things that I showed. But it is important to have for instance, here, look at the navigation pane, whether for a printed version or for a electronic version. But in general, I'm going to talk about accessibility in general. And some people, well, why is structure very important? Why the headings and subheadings are important from an accessibility point of view? Because it helps understand the structure of the content. And there are so many cues that enable that quick skimming that I was talking about earlier. And also because there are so many people who can't really, for instance, like say, imagine if you can't use a mouse and rely solely on a keyboard or assistive technology to read and navigate through it, or you just have sight issues, or you can't see properly, or you couldn't see at all of these, headings, subheadings, the structure, the navigation bar, all of these are challenges. I mean, if they're not there, there will be challenges for people because those will allow some features of, read aloud features, for instance, for Word documents. So we're going to make a Word document, not a PDF, for also accessibility, to stimulate some of the chapters to read aloud and to have easier to consider all those people with special needs, let's say. This website gives you really how to do things, and from that structure and using headings as that. So the color and contrast, we all know, and obviously you talked about that, Sherry talked about, considering the pictures and the imaging, and Sherry used the word user-friendly. Yes, so user-friendly here means, from the OER perspective, is from an accessibility, making it more accessible for and considering all those type of, people who could interact with your document. So some of the contrast of the colors, as you can see here, this is a poor one. This is a good contrast that is would be easy for, how many 3 million colorblind people, for instance, in Britain only, right? So these are very tiny details, but they're very important. So if I go quick to the handbook here, just to give you an example of the picture, this is a color contrast that we need to kind of consider to change. It's very hard to see, right? And the source in there was like, I had to kind of do this, right? So anyway, so it is important for so many people for so many accessibility reasons. And there are tips in here to tell you, right, how to do it, whether in color or black and white, and of course the information that goes with it. And the use of images right now, as I mentioned, and as you all have talked about the images, and you're very aware of how complex it is using images, especially as an open educational resource, because of the copyright issue there, and especially when including people or even the images of, at the very beginning here of Maryland images, like there is this beautiful crab here, this one, I'm wondering, are those public domain, or this beautiful flower, are they drawings? What are they exactly? This, well, I can see here the source, Library of Congress, okay? But others, for instance, as I'm scrolling down here, these, I can see the website, but when I went to the website, it was copyrighted. So, okay, copyrighted, but if we're gonna make an open educational resource, we need to make that picture open itself. So yeah, so where is it? We're here. So these are accessibility for pictures, the pictures and the images, I mean, visuals in general, and they include pictures, they include smart art graphics as well, shapes, groups, charts, objects, ink, videos, all of that are part of considerations for the image use and visual content here. They use images that support the text, and Sherry talked about that. And using the correct size and using the alternative text on images. why is that important? Because the alternative text provides description of the image for those people who are unable to view it, right? So you need to consider those people who cannot really view the picture that you're including. And these people may include people with visual impairments or who use screen readers, as well as people using text-only browsers. And the alternative text is very useful if the image fails to load properly. For instance, it's so many parts and the digital divide, and if they can't really have good internet, right? And using texts and images as the sole method of conveying important information. So here, there are a lot of images, a lot of, visuals that it would be absolutely a great asset, and from an accessibility perspective to add the alternative text to that, or to consider the color contrast for the pictures or the copyright of those pictures, etc. And the last one that I'm just gonna here touch on, the rest is something that I will share the link, you can go over, is writing links the right way. There are so many links, very useful links in the handbook. And it's just, this is I think if you go into details into this, I think you may find it useful because, links help users navigate through content or website to give like that signpost to readers to additional relevant resources. But they work best when they are written in a descriptive way. So if we have all the links in a descriptive way, because people who use screen readers sometimes read the content of the page, then bring up the menu of the link separately, tap through and visit afterwards. So this menu would only show the list of link titles, and they would be out of context away from the full text they were originally part of, and often presented in alphabetical order. So how you title your links plays a very important role and a very important part for accessibility and helping users find what they need. All right, and we'll move on to right now to the maybe adding some metadata, because one of the things that is to add metadata for your handbook is how is to facilitate the searcher's ability to find your resource, right? So if you add that title and author and keywords by going to File Info Properties, Advanced Properties, adding your names and adding the title and adding the keywords as metadata makes it more accessible and makes the searchability way easier, and more people will find your handbook. And now copyright and licensing considerations. If I go to, sorry, I keep on even here because the screen is blocking. If I go to the handbook, the very first page here has this copyright year 2021. This handbook was created for the Maryland Tesol Association. Information may be reprinted and used at the discretion of the Maryland Tesol Association, right? So will need to change this if you are interested in making an open education. Now you have it for free for so many, and it's on ResearchGate, it's free, but this needs, we need to change this into a license. You need to make some decisions, what kind of license that you are going to adopt for your handbook, and you're gonna add it there. Okay, I think I'm running out of time in here, but I will finish this licensing part because it's very important. So we'll go to the slides again. Yes, so this is how to add a Creative Commons license in OER. If you may just mute your mic, that would be nice. Thank you. So adding a Creative Commons license to an OER is extremely important, because without that license, we wouldn't really know what to do with the handbook. For instance, okay, you have this discretion to pass it on, but if I'm going to use it, what am I supposed to do? Can I have the option and the total freedom to use it as it is the case of a CC0 public domain without worrying about anything? Or are you gonna use a license that gives attribution, to the 3 authors and meaning credit to the authors who created it, as in CC BY, as you can see there, or give an attribution and allow adaptation of your work as long as the entity who will use the handbook and make adaptation will share alike, as in the CC BY share alike 4.0. And I'm not sure what's happening here. Okay, I will continue. So I am trying to talk about the 3 licenses that you can, 4 licenses here that you can see, and those licensing will tell us what are we really, others who really want to use the handbook, what can they do with it? What are they allowed to do with your handbook? So, and how do we do that, right? So how do we add a license? There are 2 simple ways to do it. The first one is to go to Creative Commons website. The first one, you choose the license that you want based on the explanation of each license and what you want others to do with the current handbook. And after making a choice, you right click and simply copy paste it. So I will just show you, this is what it is. I don't know if you can see it well, but these are all the licensing. For instance, the first one is CC BY, just given attribution, CC BY, SA, share alike, can make and change, etc. Or this one, for instance, the CC BY non-commercial 4.0, meaning whoever who want to use, they are free to share, to adapt, and as long as they give appropriate credit, provides a link to the license and indicate if changes were made, and no money, don't make any money out of that, and don't use it for any commercial purposes. So this is one of the licenses. You can just read all of them. When you click on them, they will tell you what you're supposed to be doing and you're not supposed to be doing, as not you, but the others who will use your handbook, right? It gives you details. And then, as I said, so simply, if you choose, for instance, the CC BY non-commercial to allow for people to use and change and adapt, etc., but they need to simply give you credit and also not use it for commercial purposes, and keep the same, circulating the same license. You simply do copy image, and then you add that image. It will be the same way. See, it's like highlighted right now. To your, instead of the copyright text that you have in your handbook. The other way is to go to this one. Choose a license. So here's this more interactive, and I like this one because, okay, I read it, but I don't really understand. Here, I ask a question. Do you really want to allow adaptations of your work to be shared, for instance? It says yes, or says no, or yes, as long as others share alike. So I want them to make the changes. I want them to give me credit for also my very initial work that I did, and also want them to adopt it as an open educational resource and allow others to make changes to there if they need really, to make those changes and add a license. Well, when you play with these things here, allow commercial use or not, you can see here, there is this thing that's explains what is a really free culture, right? It says here, okay, there is a stamp, you are approved. This is a good license per se, right? The CC BY, it's approved. If I say no, it's telling me, oh, watch out, this is not really a free culture because you just want people to share and you don't really care what they do without it. Anyway, so you play around these things and you choose the license and then you add it. All right, so now let's go to the very last slide, which is really kind of a recap very quick. Where's my mouse? Right here. Some of the, the takeaways here, the content related, as I said, just adding a cover sheet. Drew and everybody else talked about these things. You have all the some of the information in there. just a very quick overview in the cover sheet and the outcomes, and make sure that none of the content on those figures is copyrighted. There is a lot of copyright in here, so you need to make some changes and add some licenses to those, make them OER to those visuals. Accessibility, using the double styles to double check for headings and subheadings, and adding a navigation bars for both the downloadable Word document, preferably not a PDF, or website versions of the handbook if you want to transfer into a website. And add a list of links that are written in a descriptive way, and because how you title your links plays an important role for accessibility and helping users finding what they need in particular. And then we revisit the use of images and photos. There is the Microsoft Accessibility Checker. So if you go to that, it will list any accessibility issues in your document, including lack of text, lack of the alternative text on image and others, and make sure that those images, again, are not copyrighted. I want to search, I did a quick search for the unsplash.org. I couldn't find that one. There is an unsplash.com, not .org, that shows up to me, and it's copyrighted. Some of the contrasts that I talked about, label in the handbook. You can label the handbook, as under a CC license, open license, but use copyrighted pictures if you choose to do that, like because many journals and news articles, some of their photographs choose to have them copyrighted, but the content is open. So you need to make some decisions related to those pictures and those visuals. Are you going to keep them copyrighted and the whole handbook in OER, or are you going to make everything OER? Of course, from an OER perspective, everything should be OER. So you need to add licenses to those. And for those pictures, I don't know if they're not public domain, you can go around yourself and take class pictures from your own students or people in your school, that would be, you own the pictures, and that will save you, the hassle of all those people in the picture and the copyright. Anyway, and then add metadata for easy searchability of the handbook, and add the licensing for the whole book and other content, including the.
Did we lose Shadia? Okay, you're back.
I am back. So.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. Shadia is like the Wikipedia of open educational resources. So, and I know she has more webinars on the topic, and personally, I learned about this concept through Shadia, and it has been really helpful for my work, because I'm more aware of where to look for images and information and licenses. So it's really helpful, and maybe it is something for Maryland Tesol to think about in terms of copyright and licensing, so that the spread of the work can even be greater. Thank you so much. I know that we went a little bit over time, but if you have time to stay just for a few minutes to answer some burning questions here, I would appreciate that very much. I think so can you stay, everyone, for a few more minutes? Yes. And one of the questions is, you mentioned that it is a living document. There are a few questions, maybe I'll just ask them all at once, that it is a living document, and also it has reached a lot of stakeholders. The attendees here really want to know how you plan to revise the document. That's the first question. And also, how do you reach out to so many people? How do you distribute the information, and how can you reach so many stakeholders like that? So 2 questions for you.
I'll take over these first 2 questions. So the first question was the notion of being a living document. So going into this process, the 3 of us knew that this is a document that would have to be revised regularly. Quite often, just to ensure that everything was up to date, particularly with the state standards and state regulations with regards to teaching English learners. So at the moment, what we're doing is that all 3 of us are heavily connected with various organizations around the state of Maryland, which is one of the reasons why we were able to disseminate this to all of our contacts around the state. So for example, I work very closely with the Maryland State Department of Education on 4 other projects right now. So I was able to connect with that. I work very closely with all of the Esol supervisors for every single school district in the state of Maryland. Sherry, for example, works very closely with a lot of the not-for-profit organizations in and around the Washington, D.C. area and Baltimore. So the 3 of us, and going back to that initial brainstorming component that Luis mentioned, we knew that the 3 of us, in addition to our research and our teaching, also had lots of connections with various entities around the state of Maryland. So a lot of us already had connections that we were able to connect this handbook with, and then they were able to disseminate throughout. But because of those connections, we also know what is happening in terms of changes. So for example, with the Maryland State Department of Education, I am on a committee right now to revamp the entire Tesol certification for the state. So I am actually at the forefront of that. And with my connections to everyone at the Maryland State Department of Education, I already know that that section of the book, part 3, will have to be revamped after 2025. I'm very well aware of that because I'm actually part of the ones who are making the changes with that. So that's something which we're going to be doing and we're going to be taking on. Regarding the actual revisions that are taking on, Luis, Sherry, and I will be taking on revisions for number 2, but we are also bringing in the Maryland Tesol board. Luckily, me being on the president currently, working with everyone who's on the board, we want board members to also be able to take this on, knowing that Luis, Sherry, and I probably will not be able to do this forever in terms of how often the revision is going to be. And this is really a Maryland Tesol Association document. While we are the authors, this is something that we want housed with Maryland Tesol. And it's something that in the initial planning, we want the board to really be able to take this on so that 10, 15 years from now, whoever is on the board, this is something that those people will be able to do. And we're slowly now bringing people from the board onto this so that they're aware of what this would entail.
Yes, thank you. Would you like to add anything, Luis or Sherry? That's wonderful. I can see that, yeah. It is through your own engagements and influence, which I think is important, right? The kind of engagements that we have in different areas and that help to distribute the documents as well. I think another question that the audience here has is how can this be applied in other contexts, and how can they perhaps use their resource? And that is maybe related to what Chadia has talked about in terms of other affiliates using the resource, or other local organizations using your resource. So that's the next question. How does it apply to other contexts, and maybe how other affiliates use their resource?
Yes. Well, if it's okay, I can tackle this question. And I apologize, my dogs, I don't know what's happening. They're having like a crying or something. I don't know what's happening here. So I apologize for any noises. So the handbook, our vision was to be very Maryland specific. However, all their Tesol affiliates, but they can do, if they want to use this as reference. Definitely there are other sections, for example, like part 1, there's sections that are very general in terms of, let's think about acronyms and things like that everyone can use. There are parts of the handbook that are very specific to Maryland, but then we also believe that in addition to this, also affiliate, when they're thinking about doing a handbook or an open resource, affiliate members can also, and Tesol affiliates around the world, they can use this as reference, something that perhaps when they're doing their brainstorming, hey, what did the Maryland Tesol include in their handbook? And perhaps this is something that we can also include in our own handbooks. There's some sections that perhaps, depending on the Tesol affiliates, if they don't have a lot of nonprofit organizations in their context, perhaps that will be a part that they do not need to include, but perhaps if they have other realities in their context, they might have to include that. It's all about equipping and giving the educators, everyone supporting English learners, all the resources they need. And I've been in contact with a couple of affiliates right now, and it seems like that's the direction they're going towards, but they're very much doing kind of a brainstorm on their whole situation, their whole context to see, okay, what information do we need here? One topic that continues to be in my conversations with them, one particular topic that seems to be very important throughout any context is the topic of advocacy. So perhaps as a section that needs to be included in all contexts. As we know, advocacy, not only for learners, but also for teachers, especially now, thankfully, that we're becoming more aware about the importance of teacher advocacy and teacher well-being for teachers. So something to keep in mind.
And if
Thank
I may
you.
add to just to piggyback on what Luis just said, the advocacy piece specifically for teachers during one of our discussions on advocacy, on what should go into that section, we did briefly talk about the need for, if we were revising this and, what could we add to it, that would be certainly a very big section to add to the advocacy piece. Let's not forget about the teachers, right? And the support that we need, which we now know, thanks to the pandemic, is a big focus for many people. I would also encourage affiliates that are looking to do what we've done with the Maryland Tesol Handbook, is certainly to, as Luis and Drew have pointed out, look at what we've done. If you can use it as a model for you all, to also look at what you might feel is missing from it, because we can't cover everything. And so that might be, a jumping off point for you all in your respective affiliates to say, well, we can take from this document, from this source, but we also, knowing our specific situation and the teachers, the learners, the stakeholders, that we are targeting, these are the areas that we feel will help to round it out and help to really target and focus such a source for where we are globally. And so that would just be my suggestion, is to also look at what's not there that you might want to include.
Yeah. Thank you so much. In terms of copyright and licensing, I think maybe if you would like to use something, you can contact the authors. Usually, I think that's the default. If you don't know what the copyright situation is and whether they are willing to let you use the materials, then the first step should always be to contact the authors, right? With common license, it's clearer. If there's a stamp there, then you know that you can just use it and give attribution. But without it, I think the safe thing to do is to connect with the authors, and I can see that you're doing that in the chat. So does anyone else have any question before I wrap up the session? And the video recording will be available within a few days or within a week, I think. And yes,
Lynn, one final comment is that the information, the resources, pictures, and everything that we use there, they're all open sources. So they're materials that we can use. My husband, his does a lot of his work, his expertise is everything that has to do with user-friendly technology, and so everything that he helped us on the back end with everything that had to do with pictures and everything, putting everything together, the visuals, everything are open sources materials. He understands and explains that better than I can. I'm not very techy, but everything that he did it can be used, open sources, and the vocabulary that it's used there.
And also
Great. Then
many of the charts or flow charts, etc., that were created, we actually did those in-house, if you will. And then Luis's husband tweaked anything to really get it ready for publication. And so,
well,
open source.
That's great to hear. Would send if you're really thinking as making an open educational resource, we need to add the licensing to the licensing to the visuals. So we would know if it's public domain, there we go. I would see that license right there and I wouldn't question, and I would know what I'm allowed to do, where not where. CC0 public domain, I'm not going to be aware of anything. So, but we need the license there to tell others.
yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. This is such an important topic, and this is such a concrete, great example of how a handbook has been so influential. So I thank the speakers very much for sharing your knowledge and for your project. And thank you, Chadia, for informing us of this topic. And I know that you have more webinars. So if you have events coming up, please feel free to share with us. I will share one event that is coming up with the ANPC, and I hope that you can join us again before the convention in November the 2nd, we're going to have a webinar on Latin America and the Caribbean. So we have a lot of wonderful speakers here, and I hope to see you again on that webinar. But Drew and Chadia and colleagues, if you have others to share, please feel free to do it.
I just want to throw out there that the Maryland Tesol conference is taking place on Saturday, November 12th, and it's the first time it will be hybrid. So you can join us from anywhere in the world. Of course, if you are in the local area, anywhere near Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland, we would love to have you join us in person at Salisbury University. But of course, it can also be virtual as well. So this is our first time doing it as a hybrid. The last 2 years have been 100% virtual. So interesting, charting new territory. You can go to marylandtesol.com for all information about that, as well as that's where you can find the handbook too. So
yeah.
Oh, Luis, no, our new website, marylandtesol.com. We don't use the old one anymore.
Oh, okay.
So marylandtesol.com, nice and easy. So disregard what Luis just put down there.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, and see you again next time.
Thank you,
I put in
everyone.
the survey link. So
Thank
if
you, everybody,
Thank
for
you,
all
everyone.
of your important information from the makers of the handbook, as well as Chadia for, giving information on how to create open educational resources. So thank you so much. Nice seeing all of you. And we hope to see you at our next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Good
Take care, everyone.
you.
Have a wonderful day.
Yeah.
Bye. You too.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.